Good Saturday morning. Welcome into Countdown to Kickoff, Week 1 edition of the 2024 season. Hi, everyone. Kenneth here, Senior Analyst for the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network. Want to thank you for tuning in as you're getting ready for your favorite team to either kick off today or if they've already played or will play later on in the holiday weekend. So want to wish everyone a happy and safe Labor Day weekend. And let's get to it. I have you for the next 59 minutes. We're going to pick up where we left off with the podcast and just touch on some more points with that Texas A&M Notre Dame game. As you can see here on the board, we're not going to hit all of these games in depth, just going to touch on them and just really give some highlights. If you haven't already checked out the podcast, you can find that on iTunes or Spotify, or check our feed on Crunch Time VIP on Twitter. And let's just jump right in. As I said, we're going to give some of the updated lines, some of the betting splits on these feature games that we broke down during the podcast, and a few other games that we're going to be keeping an eye on this Saturday morning. So let's jump right in and really pick up where we left off with that Texas A&M Notre Dame game. This is one of the most heavily bet games on the board right now, as we're sitting here on a beautiful Saturday morning. Over 50,000 bets have already been placed on this game. That line still sits with Texas A&M as a 3-point favorite there in College Station. Now, I want to give you the breakdown of the betting splits as far as the point spread go. 59% of the tickets are coming in on Notre Dame. However, 57% of the money is coming in on Texas A&M. So we're seeing more higher ticket counts coming in on Notre Dame. But as far as those big ticket wagers so far, that's been coming in on Texas A&M. We may see this line by the time we get to kickoff later on today dip down to maybe 2.5. I think we may get some buyback on that, but I expect that line to be around this 3 number once we get things kicked off there in College Station. And want to give this breakdown as far as the matchup here. No one knows Raleigh Leonard, the quarterback for Notre Dame, better than his former head coach at Duke for the past 2 years in Mike Elko, the head coach for Texas A&M. We talked about the inexperience on the Notre Dame offensive line. First time in I think it's over 25 years that Notre Dame won't have a senior starting on the offensive line this year in game 1. That's significant, especially when you're going up against a defensive line that may be one of the best in the Southeastern Conference, led by Nick Scordon coming over from Purdue. Shamar Turner, one of the best interior tackles in all of college football. Albert Regis and Shamar Stewart anchoring the other defensive end spot. I'm not going to be so much concerned with how many sacks they get in this game, but how they rush Raleigh Leonard. You want to keep him within the pocket, build a cage around him, as one of my defensive mentors taught me, was you want to cage rush him. So you want to squeeze the pocket from the inside with those tackles, and you want your defensive ends not to get too far up the field, but really just kind of box him in, so to speak, and now force him to throw into much tighter windows. I don't expect Mike Elko to bring a lot of blitzes in this ball game and really force Raleigh Leonard to throw into a lot of tight windows and really see Tyrion York, senior linebacker, really kind of spy Raleigh Leonard in this ball game. If you see that in this contest, that's going to bode extremely well for the Aggies there at home. For Notre Dame, the injury concern for Howard Cross III, dealing with a lower leg injury. He's going to give it a go in this ball game, but definitely not going to be 100%. If I'm Texas A&M, I want to make sure that I lean on him early in the ball game. Give him some combo blocks. Give him uh, some chip blocks if necessary. Nothing dirty, but what you're trying to do is you're trying to force him to play a lot of snaps early in this ball game. So by the time we get to late in the third quarter in, and on into the fourth quarter, that defensive line for Notre Dame is a little bit more exhausted, especially dealing with that Texas heat that we talked about in the podcast and preview show from earlier. Big note in this ball game: kicker for Notre Dame, Mitch Jeter is going to absolutely have to nail his kicks in this ball game. We know that if it's a really tight ball game, special teams will play a huge part in this ball game. And when I say special teams, I'm talking about your kicker, your punter, your your kickoff and punt return coverage, as well as your punt and kickoff return team for you, setting up great field position, pinning your opponent deep in their own side of the ball. So that's something that I'm really going to be looking out for in this ball game. Like I said, I think that heat is going to be a big factor in this ball game. Let's give some thoughts here on some other featured matchups and a game that's going to be kicking off here in just a few hours in beautiful downtown Atlanta. The number one ranked Georgia Bulldogs will be taking on the Clemson Tigers. In this matchup, we see another game that's been really heavily bet. So far, we're looking at over 60,000 bets that have been placed on this game. Folks, I expect that number to continue to go up as we get closer and closer to kickoff. Right now, looking at the ticket splits, and it is heavy both as far as the ticket count and the the money coming in heavily on Georgia. 82% of the tickets, 84% of the bets are coming in on Georgia. Yet we've seen that line go from where it opened at 14. That line touched as low as 11 and a half in some shops. Right now currently sits at 12. Key for this matchup. Will we see Trevor Etienne in this ball game? We know going up against Big Brother's former team there, will he be available or will he be suspended for this ball game? Something that we're still trying to get some more information on. But if he's not able to go, his backup we know is already out in this ball game. Carson Beck needs to play like someone who wants to be the first overall pick in next year's draft, as well as someone who hopes to lead his team to a national championship this year and be up for some very prestigious award, one being the Heisman Trophy Award. He's going to have the governor taken off of him this year and really step up and really carry the burden for this Georgia Bulldog team. He's playing behind a fantastic offensive line there at the University of Georgia, led by Tate Rutledge. We talked about him in the preview podcast. And what can you say about Tate Rutledge except he's one of the best in the country and just an absolute physical presence? Let's flip it over because this matchup is going to come down to the quarterbacks. Cade Klubnik, we talked about him in the preview podcast. He's got to step up and really elevate his game this year. Going into his junior year, that's when you really want to see quarterbacks really go to a different level in their development. Last year, 19 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. Got to cut down on the interceptions, got to take better care of the ball. We know that this Clemson team is absolutely stacked all over the field. We'll see if he can develop a connection with one of his wide receivers. Taylor Brown and Antonio Williams, possibly two of those wide receivers he could definitely try to hook up with this year. I would expect to see a lot out of running back Phil Maffa in this contest. You got to stay connected in this ball game if you're the Clemson Tigers. Cannot fall behind 14 or 17 points early on in this ball game. Stay connected, get this game into the fourth quarter, um, either with a lead or at least tied going into the fourth quarter, because we know Georgia will absolutely take the air out of the ball if they have a two-score lead in this contest going into the fourth quarter. Up next is a game that I know a couple of fans reached out to us and said, why are you choosing the Miami of Ohio versus Northwestern game? Well, you have one of the best group of five teams in college football projected with the Red Hawks of Miami of Ohio going up against one of the lower Power Four rated teams in Northwestern. Let's take a look at see how many tickets are on this game so far. One of the lower bet games on the board right now. Looking at less than 13,000 bets have been ridden on this game. Right now, that line currently sits with Northwestern as a 3.5 point favorite. They've taken 59% of the bets, but taking 72% of the money. That's why you've seen that line tick up to -3.5. It had set at 3 for most of the past couple of days. So we've seen a little bit more money come in on Northwestern. That's why you get that 0.5 point. But I still like the Red Hawks to have a chance in this ball game to certainly keep it close. And if they're able to keep it close, you can absolutely pull off an upset. We know that this Northwestern team does not score a lot of points. Last year, only scored 22.1 points per game, one of the lowest in college football last year. If Miami of Ohio is able to get pressure early on in this ball game, and when I say pressure, I mean not just playing really good defense, but also playing really good offense. Keep your defense off the field as much as possible. Fewer snaps, the fresher your team can be in the second half. Kind of use that same blueprint that Georgia Tech used against Florida State in Dublin in week 0. You want to shorten the game, have at most 9 possessions per team in this ball game. If you can keep that to 8 or 9 possessions, you give yourself a chance to stay connected. You know that this Northwestern team is not really explosive. If you're able to kind of, time up your shots, you give yourself an opportunity in this ball game. Brett Galbert has got to have a phenomenal game for Miami, taking care of the ball, not turning it over. And as we saw last year, the Red Hawks averaged about 25.6 points per game. I know it's against a little bit less competition, but was able to really play great defense last year against the opponents that they went against. And if they're able to replicate that later on today, give themselves an excellent chance of staying in this ball game. Up next, I want to touch on this ball game with the Miami Hurricanes and the Florida Gators. Really highlighted a few things in this contest, but let's see as we look at the line here. Miami currently sits as a 2.5 point favorite in this ball game. So we've seen just a little bit of buyback on the Florida Gators here in the overnight. Looking at about 39,000 bets on this ball game, and I expect this line to kind of settle in at this 2.5, may tick back up to 3, but I feel like we're going to be right around this 2.5 to 3 point margin as far as the line once we get to kickoff. 70% of the tickets have come in on the Hurricanes. 81% of the money has come in on the Canes. Talked about it. The Canes really need to take advantage of this Florida Gator defense, especially on the defensive line. You want to run tempo early in this ball game, really wear out that defensive front for the Gators, especially when you're looking at they don't have a true number one pass rusher with Princely moving on to Ole Miss. Tyreek Sapp is expected to kind of take over as the number one pass rusher for this Florida Gator team. I don't know if he's going to be able to get the kind of push that they're going to need in this ball game. Now, running back Montrell Johnson Jr. We talked about it. Had a little knee procedure a few weeks ago. Has not had any contact, and his first live contact will be on his first carry in this ball game. Eugene Wilson III is a fantastic wide receiver there. Graham Mertz did a really great job last year taking care of the ball. If I am Miami on defense, not going to blitz Mertz a lot in this ball game. I'm going to see if I can't get home with natural pressure and really put a safety over the top of Wilson when he's on the outside and really force Mertz to really beat me with one of the other wide receivers, whether it's Jackson, whether it's Dyke, or even the tight end, Brottingham. But I really got to force somebody else to beat me. And when they bring in DJ Lagway, be on high alert as there's probably going to be some kind of trick play being run by the Florida Gators. For Miami on the offensive side of the ball, we talked about it. Run some tempo, really get into the legs of those defensive linemen there for the University of Florida. This is why you went out and spent all of that money in the transfer portal. You brought in Cam Ward from Washington State. You brought in a Damian Martinez, big bruising 230-pound running back. You want to get that big horse going early in this ball game, then use your other running backs as a changeup, and then later on in the ball game, really go back to Martinez. And if you've worn down that Florida defensive front early in the ball game, they're going to be absolutely gassed by the time you get to late in that third quarter, and especially in the fourth quarter. We know Gainesville is notorious for having some afternoon showers. That's only going to crank that humidity up a little bit more. So if you can get that Florida defensive line fatigued in this ball game, you really give yourself a great chance if you're the University of Miami in this contest. Another game that we're going to give you an update on, and that is the Penn State West Virginia game. Really, really looking forward to this matchup because so many storylines. No one, as far as in the coaching profession, knows the point spread better than our friend there in Happy Valley, and that's one James Franklin. If he has the opportunity to cover a line, he is absolutely going to do it. So that is definitely something to keep an eye on in this contest. We've seen this line just absolutely bleed since it opened up in the betting market a few months ago. You could have got this number with West Virginia plus 10.5 just a week ago. That line currently sits with, let's get a refresh here on the screen here. That line currently sits at 7.5 for Penn State in this ball game. And when we take a look at how many tickets have been ridden on this game, you're talking about already 45,000 tickets. I expect that count to go up even further, especially with that being a 11 a.m. kickoff Central Time, that is, on Fox there. So let's take a look at the splits here. 53% of the tickets are coming in on Penn State. 60% of the money. That's why we've kind of seen that line really kind of freeze. I don't think the bookmakers really want to get that number down to 7, as if it gets to 7, you're going to see a heavy buyback there for Penn State. And I think I would not be surprised if you've seen some professional bettors who have bought that line down to 7 and have already started to take Penn State at that much lower number. So that is always something to look out for. So let's kind of touch on this matchup just a little bit for the next few minutes. You're talking about a team in West Virginia who faced Penn State week 1 last year. Now, that game was in Happy Valley last year. Lost that game very convincingly, I should say, 38-15. This was one of the best game performances that we saw out of Penn State quarterback Drew Allar all season last year. Garrett Green, a pedestrian game in this matchup last year. Gets this game at home in Morgantown, he's going to absolutely have to play significantly better in this ball game. He's got a fantastic stable of running backs led by C.J. Donaldson, Jaheim White, and they're going to have to lean very heavy on that run game in this contest because they ran the ball fantastic last year. Almost 229 yards per game rushing last year. That was third best in the country. West Virginia averaged almost 32 points per game. Where they have to improve is the passing game. Only 205, well, let's round it up, 206 yards passing per game. That was in the bottom percentage of college football last year. As far as the defense goes, you want to see a big-time performance in this ball game by this West Virginia defensive line, led by Sean Martin. He is a senior for the Mountaineers, 6'5", 295-pound, just absolutely phenomenal defensive tackle. He's going to have to play even better this year going into his senior campaign because this team is absolutely going to have to get a big-time performance out of him, especially with this game being at home. Crowd noise gonna be in your favor, so you can kind of, scheme up the snap count a little bit better of your opponents, and hopefully take advantage of, some really, snap procedure penalties, potentially false starts, anything anything that will give you an advantage in this ball game. You absolutely have to take full advantage of it because when you're playing at home, you absolutely have to take advantage of every possible advantage. And when we look at what did we get from Sean Martin last year? Well, we got 1 sack last year. We got 24 tackles, 4 tackles for loss. As we look at their defensive numbers last year, no defensive player for West Virginia had more than 5 sacks last season. That is absolutely got to change this year. Flipping it back over to the offense, between White and Donaldson, you're talking about 2 running backs. Now, neither had 1,000 yards. Both had about a little over 800 yards rushing. You, adding Garrett Green, who will tuck the ball and run with it, you're looking at basically your top 3 rushers back last year who combined for, let's call it 2,500 yards rushing last year. And we're looking at, 28 combined rushing touchdowns between those 3. So we know that this team was fantastic on the ground last year. Going to have to improve that air number if they have any hopes of pulling off the win in this ball game. Let's take a look at some notes that we have for Penn State in this ball game. And we know Penn State is absolutely going to try to get some fantastic production out of their quarterback last year because, like I said, on the surface, those numbers do not look horrible for Drew Allard. 25 touchdowns, 2 INTs. So he took great care of the ball, but when we really dive into the numbers, a lot of that production was behind the line of scrimmage or at the line of scrimmage, I should say. So he wasn't taking a lot of shots down the field. Now, one of his big time weapons transferred down to Auburn in Keandre Lambert Smith last year, who caught a team high 53 receptions, over 600 yards, did have 4 touchdowns, only averaged 12.7. So, like I said, not a lot of deep shots being taken by this offense last year. You bring in former Kansas offensive coordinator to really get both this pass game and the ground game going. Katron Allen had right at 900 yards rushing last year. Nicholas Singleton about 752 yards rushing last year. So you want to see that production really ramp up for both of those talented running backs there for Penn State. Looking at the defense, we got to see just how much the position change for Abdul Carter. Now going to play more on the line of scrimmage there. A little bit undersized at 6'3", 250, but with his fantastic athletic ability, really, really can cause some problems there for the West Virginia offensive line. And speaking of offensive lines, we know that Olu Fashanu, uh, talented offensive tackle for Penn State, now in the NFL, who's going to anchor that left tackle spot? Right now, we're projecting Drew Shelton to be that left tackle, 6'5", 300-pound junior, to really man that left tackle spot. This offensive line has got to give Drew Allard a lot more protection this year. And with the change at the offensive coordinator spot, we could see some more shots being taken down the field for Penn State in this ball game. Vegas is saying this game should be a one-score contest. We're going to kind of expect to see some of that as well in this contest. So we got that game kicking off here in just a few hours. So we won't have to wait much longer before this game kicks off. Now, coming up on, Sunday night. So tomorrow night, um, they're in Allegiant Stadium, home of the Las Vegas Raiders. The LSU Tigers will face new in the Big Ten Conference, the USC Trojans. And let's just take a look at the ticket count for this game so far. Now, with this game being played tomorrow night, we've still already seen 41,000 tickets being ridden on this ball game. And when we look at the handle and we look at the bets, 69% of the tickets are for LSU. 73% of the money is going to LSU. Yet that line has dropped from 6.5, 6, 5.5, 5, 4.5. That line's all the way down to 4. Somebody knows something. And full disclosure, we got this at 6.5 because we've seen what Brian Kelly there at LSU. He does not win the opening game in these big primetime matchups. Absolutely got smoked last year by Florida State there in the Superdome. And I believe that score was 45 to 24. So yeah, The big change for LSU, defensive coordinator Blake Baker coming over from Missouri to really man up that defensive line there for LSU. And we talked about it. This was one of the worst defenses in all of college football last year. Got to improve on those numbers because when you're outside of the top 75 in the four major categories scoring, rush defense, pass defense, total defense that is not a recipe for having a successful season, despite having one of the best offenses in all of college football last year. Speaking of offense, got an injury update for you. Chris Hilton, wide receiver for LSU, dealing with a bone bruise in his leg, lower leg. He's going to give it a go, but is he going to be full go? That is a major question mark in this ball game. Kyron Lacy is looking to take over the number one wide receiver. And when we listen to some of the press clippings in this ball game, standout left tackle Will Campbell said, "We're coming to Las Vegas for a fight, and we're going to run the ball." Now, that for USC should be a wake-up call. And what LSU is going to challenge is your defensive front seven's manhood in this ball game. If you can't hold up to one of the better offensive lines in college football, it's going to be a very long afternoon for USC. New offensive coordinator Joe Sloan, along with his co-offense coordinator Cortez Hankton, want to see how the offense changes now that Mike Denbrock back at Notre Dame for his third tour of duty there with the Fighting Irish. How much does the offense change from a play calling standpoint? We know how much talent has walked out of the LSU offensive playbook. A combined 50 total touchdowns from Heisman Trophy winning quarterback Jalen Daniels, 10 on the ground, 40 with that right arm of his. We're talking about over 150 receptions between Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr., over 2,700 yards in receiving and 31 receiving touchdowns. Folks, those two wide receivers averaged a combined 211 yards per game receiving last year. Can Lacy, Hilton, CJ Daniels, can those three equal the production of those two standout wide receivers now in the NFL? Brian Thomas with Jacksonville, Malik Neighbors with the New York Giants. We got to see the improvement from LSU on the defensive line standpoint. One of the worst stop units in college football. Harold Perkins is going to be playing more of that weak outside linebacker position. Really going to be all over the field as a run and hit linebacker. I mean, that's what you are when you play the wheel linebacker. You're expected to make a lot of tackles and a lot of plays. We'll see what they try to do with him on third and known passing situations. Do they kind of try to bring him off the edge, try to create some heat and take some of the pressure off of that LSU secondary? Speaking of that LSU secondary, they're going to be tested in this ball game by Lincoln Riley and what he likes to do as a offensive-minded head coach. Riley is going to look to really test this LSU defense, and it's going to start with the quarterback, Miller Moss. And when you look at some of the targets he's going to be throwing to, Zachariah Branch looks to have a breakout season there for LSU. Spent some time getting his conditioning better in going into his sophomore year. Kind of hit that freshman wall late in the year last year. He's going to be all over the place. He's going to play a lot in the slot, and we will see him on the outside. But the other two wide receivers, Jacoby Lane, 6'4", Kyron Hudson, 6'1", with a tremendous wingspan, and tight end Lake McRee, 6'4", 250-pound, kind of like an H-back. So you're going to see a decided size advantage there for USC in this contest, and you expect them to win a lot of jump balls in this contest. Now, you bring in the new defensive coordinator over from UCLA in DeAnton Lynn, and we know that that stop unit that he had in Pasadena, he's going to need to bring some of that excellent defensive play calling there for USC. Now, the big concern for USC, the size of that defensive front. These guys are a little bit light in the cakes, as we like to say. Outside of Bear Alexander, the transfer from the University of Georgia, going into his senior year, there's not one defensive lineman that's over 300 pounds in this ball game. So you're going to have to really kind of bring that safety in the box, and your linebackers are going to have to get into some of those gaps, shoot some of those gaps if LSU is going to try to play bully ball with their offensive line. So we're talking about defensive end Nate Clifton, 6'4", 289-pound senior. Can he get a stalemate with whichever one of those tackles he's going to be going up against, whether it's Campbell, whether it's Emory Jones? At the other defensive end spot, Jamal Muhammad, I should say, 6'1", 260-pound senior. So he's one of their smaller defensive ends, but has some lateral quickness. So if he's gonna cause some havoc in this ball game, it's gonna be using some of that speed to get around the edge and really make sure he can set the edge when LSU tries to run directly at him. We talked about Barrett Alexander. Also on the interior of that defensive line, Elijah Hughes, 6'3", 289. So we know about the tackles for LSU, but can that interior triangle really hold up? And if I am USC, I'm using a lot of run blitzes. I may even go to a bear front for all of you older college football, NFL football fans. When the Bears won their Super Bowl back in 1985, legendary defensive coordinator Buddy Ryan cooked up what was known as the 46 defense. Basically, you have 10 guys up near the line of scrimmage, and you have every one of those offensive gaps filled. So you have the tackle covered up, you have the guard covered up, you have the center covered up. If they have a tight end on the line of scrimmage, he's covered. So every gap is covered. And now what you can do is you can use some of your linebackers who are going to be basically playing a wide nine technique and really crash down from the outside. And because Garrett Nussmeier is not a mobile quarterback, you're not worried about him getting outside and breaking a long run like you saw a Jalen Daniels do last year. So that may be something we keep an eye on tomorrow night there in beautiful Las Vegas, Nevada. Looking forward to seeing that contest. And another game, as far as big time matchup, is the Boston College Eagles taking on the Florida State Seminoles. Now, this is the second straight conference game for Florida State. We know what happened there in Dublin. Not only did they not cover, but lost the game outright to Georgia Tech. And if I'm the head coach for Boston College, I would seriously take a look at that game plan and see how much of that I can implement for my team. And I'm talking about really forcing Florida State to play another one-score game on back-to-back weeks. So really looking forward to seeing what Bill O'Brien cooks up for Florida State in this matchup. But before we get to that, let's take a look at where that line sits and why we're covering it. Currently, we only have about 10,000 bets on this game now. We do have 2 full days before this game is played, as this game is going to be played Monday night there in Tallahassee. Game right now has, and we saw this line get as low as 16 and a half in some shops. Right now, we're looking at a line with Florida State with a 17-point point spread there as the favorite. The bets on this game right now have been pretty much even. 49% of the tickets so far have gone to Florida State. 46% of the money is going to Florida State. So a lot of people are liking that key number there for Boston College to stay within basically a 3-score contest there. And why are they liking it? Well, Boston College brings back a lot of veterans that played a lot of snaps last year for them, especially on the defensive line spot. So you're looking at all 4 returning starters on the defensive line. Cam Arnold, fantastic linebacker there for Boston College, is going to have to play very close to the line of scrimmage. And I expect, as far as the offensive game plan, Thomas Castanelos, 5'10", 200-pound quarterback, better with his legs than his arms right now in his career. And Bill O'Brien has said this repeatedly to the lead up of this ball game. He's going to let his quarterback be himself. And what that means is you're going to see a lot of design runs and a lot of off-script runs for Castanello. And if Florida State is not sound within their gap scheme on defense, he's going to be able to extend some drives there for Boston College. And one of the keys when you're playing on the road is you want to take the crowd out of the game early. And the way that you do that is extend drives early on in the ball game. Really kind of force Florida State to have to think about what just happened last week in Dublin, traveling back home you think it's a long week, but when you're talking about flying back international for college kids, it's a little bit different from professionals who have done this repeatedly. DJ just absolutely had a horrible game last week. For most of that game, while he was completing a lot of passes, he wasn't able to connect on a lot of deep shots down the field. So that's something that Florida State's going to have to clean up. Also, looking at the run game last week against Georgia Tech. And as I pull up these numbers here, what really stands out to me in this contest was the inability for Florida State to run the ball against Georgia Tech. So last week, Florida State 31 rush attempts for 98 yards, 3.2 yards per rush. That's simply just not going to get it done. And we look at what we got from the passing game, really not much better. 27 pass attempts last week, only 193 yards passing, 7.1 yards per pass attempt. Conversely, the Florida State defense was just absolutely gassed last week against Georgia Tech. 36 rush attempts, 190 yards rushing, 5.3 yards per rush attempt. Over a 2-yard difference per rush attempt in that ball game. Same can be said for the passing game. Now, Haynes King's numbers on the surface does not look impressive. 11 for 16, only 146 yards, 9.1 yards per pass attempt. Brent Key, very early in that ball game, understood the advantage that he had, and it was, as he said in the post game, "Are you kidding me? We're going to run the ball," and that's exactly what they did in that contest. So, Florida State needs to have a bounce back game this week, because the one thing you don't want to do is go 0-2 to start the season, but also going 0-2 within the conference would absolutely be extremely difficult to climb out of for Florida State if they have any hopes of getting to the college football playoffs and certainly making their way to the ACC title game. Another game that I'm going to mention, and we don't have this on the visuals, so, and typically when I see a game like this, and especially when the line is really kind of starting to move, and that's the Kentucky Southern Miss game. And we'll start with Southern Miss here in this contest. We know that Southern Miss, coming off of a really poor season last year, going 3-9 last year. Kentucky, coming off of a 7-win season last year, getting bowl eligible and then winning their bowl game last year. So let's take a look at Southern Miss. And that line opened with Kentucky as a 28.5-point favorite in this ball game. Right now, currently, we're looking at that line sitting at Kentucky 26.5. So we've gone through a key number there. Now, here's what I really want you to really pay very close attention to. Only less than 3,500 bets on this game have been registered, and we've seen that kind of line movement in this contest. That's something to pay very close attention to. And why would a team coming off a 3-win season be taking, that kind of wager? And let's take a look at the splits. I'm sorry. Forgive me. It's week one for all of us. 70% of the tickets have been ridden on Kentucky, 61% of the money. Yet we've seen that line continue to fall here. And it's not so much Southern Miss, it's a couple of other factors that I'm taking a look at. One, you have a defensive-minded head coach there in Mark Stoops for Kentucky. And up next on the schedule for Kentucky, a big game against South Carolina, followed by another big game against Georgia. So 2 back-to-back conference games. So if you're Kentucky, you're going to want to get a lead early and then absolutely take the air out of the ball. So fewer plays late, especially if they have a lead in the second half. Let's say they're up by 14 or even 21 points. You could see absolutely Kentucky um, pulling their starters, especially with two conference games coming up next week and the week after, wanting to um, make sure that they have their full roster available going into SEC play. Not going to look to run the score up. And that's not really Mark Stoops' DNA. Um, kind of like Kirby Smart for Georgia, once he has a lead and feels like the game is kind of out of reach, he's gonna run the play clock down and continue to pound the ball, really running out that clock. So this is a game that we've kept our eye on and wanted to really take that line before it got below 28. Currently, that number sits at 26, folks. I would not be surprised if we see it tick down just a little bit further because some of those things that I mentioned. So, Southern Miss, you want to just kind of stay within that number for the first three quarters. Maybe pick up a touchdown at the end of the first half, early on in the third quarter, making sure that you're keeping that number let's say between 14 and 21. And if you're doing that going into the fourth quarter, you have a really good chance of covering in that contest. Looks like we got about 7 more minutes here. So I'm just going to do a quick rapid fire here on some ball games. Another game that we're going to be highly invested in is that UNLV at Houston, two teams that are not expected to have great seasons this year, but somebody's going to leave here 1-0. We're looking at, can Houston take care of their home field advantage in this contest? Another game that is right here in our backyard, the Virginia Tech Hokies traveling to beautiful downtown Nashville, Tennessee, taking on the Vanderbilt Commodores. That line sits with Virginia Tech as a 13.5 point favorite. Seen about 20,000 tickets bet on this contest so far. Haven't seen a lot of line movement. And as I try to give you that refresh number here, as that game will be kicking off here very soon. Matter of fact, we got that game slated to kick off here in just a couple of hours. So let's take a look. Virginia Tech getting 68% of the tickets, but only 49% of the money. That's why we saw that line briefly tick down to 13, minus 13 for Virginia Tech. But here in the past few hours, we've seen a little bit of buyback on Virginia Tech, and that line sits at 13.5. Another game that we're going to be paying a little bit of attention to, and that is Eastern Michigan and UMass. That game has seen some significant ticket count as that will be kicking off at 2:30 Central Time. Look like that's going to be on ESPN Plus. Line open with Eastern Michigan as a 2.5 point underdog. Briefly got up to 3, and some shops got up to 3.5. We've seen buyback here for Eastern Michigan. Right now, 35% of the tickets are on Eastern Michigan, but 55% of the money. So a huge disparity there as far as ticket count versus the size of the wagers being placed. So uh, somebody is not only just taking Eastern Michigan to cover that 3.5 and now 2.5, but to win that game outright. So that's something to keep an eye on in this ball game. Another game that we're going to touch on, the Syracuse Orangemen. Got to give a shout out to my good friend Pigskin Petey, big Syracuse Orange fan, going up against the Ohio Bobcats. That line opened with the Orangemen as a 17. That line opened with the Orangemen as a 17.5 point favorite, got up to 18, and that's where we jumped into the market and we took Ohio to cover that 18 point margin there. And why were we really interested in taking Syracuse at, taking Ohio at that number? It's because next week, Syracuse will be jumping into conference play, taking on Georgia Tech. So another potential look-ahead spot here for a team that is a very sizable favorite. We're looking at the Orange, as far as the number of bets, we're looking at about 15,000 tickets being ridden on that game. I've already looked at the splits here. 83% of the tickets are being ridden on Syracuse. However, only 63% of the money. So that is a 20% difference. And I'm not the only one, and our group isn't the only one that has liked Ohio to at least cover and stay within the number of 18 where we got it. You can still get it at 17.5. Would not be surprised if that line ticks down a little bit further and hits that key number of 17. So if you're interested in getting Ohio, I would go ahead and jump on that rather quickly. And one more before we get out of here. Won't be able to go into this game in a whole lot of detail, but just keep an eye on it, and that's our service academies. The Naval Academy, a 33 point favorite against Bucknell. And we always like to give a shout out to our armed forces teams there. Air Force, a 29.5 point favorite over their opponent coming up here, as well as they will be playing Mermac out of the FCS. And just taking a quick look here, making sure that we got all of our service academies. I know I'm looking for Army, so bear with me. And that's right, Army is already played, so we don't have Army up as well. So that is the rundown for week 1 of the college football season. Want to say thank you to my fantastic team, Summer and Jessica, as they are on assignment covering their respective games later on today. Our senior analyst, Billy, who does a fantastic job of getting us all set up from the betting standpoint in college football as well. And in our final few seconds here, I want to thank you, the listener, for tuning in. It is always our pleasure to join you each and every week, as Army did get that 42-7 win over Lehigh. I wanted to make sure we get that in. So on behalf of my team here at the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network, Summer, Jessica, and Billy, this is Kenneth signing off. Have a great kickoff to college football week 1, as games will be kicking off here in just a few minutes. Have a great day. God bless everybody.